Hello everyone, and welcome to RadioCSIRT English Edition, your daily appointment with cybersecurity news. I'm Mark Frederic Gomez, your French cybersecurity voice for today's threat landscape. It's Friday, December 5th, 2025. You're listening to episode 41, live from Valency in France. In today's headlines, incident: Cloudflare attributes a global service outage to a failed emergency mitigation designed to block the critical react-to-shell vulnerability. Regulation: CISA adds the React flaw to its Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog and releases a joint report on Brickstorm, a new backdoor used by PRC state actors targeting VMware vSphere. Vulnerability: CERT-FR issues a critical advisory for PostgreSQL PG Bouncer, warning of a SQL injection flaw that could compromise database integrity. Cybercrime: smishing gangs shift tactics for the holidays, leveraging fake loyalty point schemes and tax laws to tokenize stolen payment cards into digital wallets. CISA agency has officially updated its Known Exploited Vulnerabilities KEV catalog to include CVE 2025-55182, a critical remote code execution RCE vulnerability affecting Meta React server components. This inclusion, mandated by Binding Operational Directive 22-01, confirms that threat actors are actively leveraging this flaw in the wild to breach federal and enterprise networks. This vulnerability represents a significant escalation in the threat landscape for web applications. Unlike typical client-side React vectors, such as cross-site scripting, XSS, CVE 2025-55182 targets the server-side rendering logic. This enables remote attackers to bypass client-side controls entirely and execute arbitrary code on the underlying server infrastructure, granting full control over the application runtime environment. The operational risk is critical, as successful exploitation facilitates immediate initial access, potential privilege escalation, and direct pathways to back-end data stores. Security teams must recognize that the server component architecture implies that malicious payloads are processed within the trusted server zone, making traditional WEF rules potentially insufficient if they are not tuned for specific serialization attacks. Immediate action is required. Vulnerability management teams must prioritize the identification and patching of all exposed React instances. Given the active exploitation status, SOCs should concurrently hunt for indicators of compromise, specifically scrutinizing inbound traffic for malform requests targeting React rendering endpoints, as the window for proactive mitigation is rapidly closing before widespread automated exploitation campaigns saturate the attack surface. The CISA, NSA, and the Canadian Cyber Centre have issued a joint alert regarding Brickstorm, a sophisticated persistent implant deployed by PRC state-sponsored actors specifically targeting critical infrastructure through VMware vSphere and ESXi environments. This Go-based ALF malware achieves persistence by modifying system initialization files within /etc/sysconfig, ensuring execution prior to legitimate hypervisor processes, while simultaneously employing a self-watching routine that automatically reinstalls the binary if the process is terminated or disrupted. The command and control architecture is engineered for deep evasion. Brickstorm leverages DNS over HTTPS, DOH, through legitimate public resolvers like Cloudflare or Google to obfuscate C2 infrastructure resolution. Exfiltration traffic is then tunneled through WebSockets encapsulating nested TLS layers, utilizing multiplexing libraries such as SMux or YAMUX. This technique effectively hides multiple command streams, including interactive shells within a single standard HTTPS encrypted connection. Operationally, the implant functions as a SOCs proxy to facilitate lateral movement from the DMZ to domain controllers for NTDs.dit exfiltration. Critically for virtualized environments, specific variants exploit VSOCK interfaces to enable inter-VM communication that remains invisible to traditional network taps. Incident response teams must immediately threat hunt on vCenter servers for suspicious ELF binaries, mimicking VMware processes like VMSRC or update-mgr, and configure firewalls to strictly block all unauthorized outbound DOH traffic originating from the virtualization management plane. CERT has released Security Advisory AVI 1061 highlighting CVE 2025-12819, a critical SQL injection vulnerability identified within PG Bouncer, the ubiquitous connection pooler for PostgreSQL environments. This flaw exists within the middleware's query processing logic, enabling attackers to inject malicious SQL commands directly into the traffic stream before it reaches the backend database. Unlike typical application layer SQLE, this vulnerability compromises the network abstraction layer itself, effectively bypassing input sanitization and parameterization defenses implemented at the application or ORM level. Affected instances running versions prior to 1.25.1 are susceptible to arbitrary SQL command execution under the privileges of the pooler's service account, potentially circumventing upstream authentication and access control policies. Given PG Bouncer's role as a choke point in high availability clusters, successful exploitation threatens the integrity and confidentiality of the entire data estate. Database administrators must immediately upgrade to version 1.25.1 to patch the packet parsing defect and prevent unauthorized command injection against the underlying PostgreSQL clusters. Cloudflare has traced today's widespread service outage to a failed emergency mitigation rollout designed to counter the critical React 2 shell vulnerability tracked as CVE 2025-55182. The disruption, which returned 500 internal server errors for approximately 28% of Cloudflare's global HTTP traffic, was triggered by changes to the edge network's body parsing logic. Engineers attempted to filter malicious payloads targeting the React server components, RSC flight protocol, but the updated parsing rules inadvertently caused a cascading failure in request processing. This incident exemplifies the operational risks inherent in hot patching edge infrastructure against complex serialization exploits without extensive staging. The urgency of the mitigation was driven by intelligence confirming active exploitation of React 2 shell by PRC-linked threat actors, including Earth Lamia and Jackpot Panda. The vulnerability allows unauthenticated remote code execution, RCE, in React 19.x and frameworks like Next.js by manipulating the serialization of server functions. With functional proof of concepts, POCs, widely available and actively weaponized for initial access, the threat landscape has shifted to immediate containment. However, the Cloudflare incident serves as a stark warning. Defending against protocol-level vulnerabilities like RSC flaws requires precise inspection logic, as aggressive filtering at the WF layer can replicate the availability impact of a DDoS attack if the parsing overhead or logic is miscalculated. An article from Brian Krebs Security about China-based cybercriminal syndicates are executing a strategic pivot in their smishing operations, shifting away from package delivery lures toward financial inducements involving fake loyalty points and tax refunds. These campaigns, timed for the holiday season, leverage sophisticated phishing-as-a-service kits that utilize Apple's iMessage and Android's RCS protocols. By using these database messaging channels instead of traditional SMS, attackers bypass carrier-grade spam filters and gain perceived legitimacy through rich media previews. The attack infrastructure employs rigorous user agent filtering, serving the malicious payload only to mobile devices to evade detection by desktop-based security scanners and automated crawlers. The primary objective has evolved from simple card data harvesting to digital wallet tokenization fraud. The kill chain involves a real-time relay attack. As the victim inputs their card details, the backend script attempts to provision that card onto an attacker-controlled device via Apple Pay or Google Wallet. The one-time password, OTP, requested from the victim is not for a transaction, but to authorize this device enrollment, effectively granting the attacker persistent tokenized access to the victim's funds without further authentication. Simultaneously, a surge in fraudulent e-commerce storefronts is deploying dynamic code injection techniques where malicious scripts execute solely during the checkout process. This selective execution allows these sites to bypass passive web scrapers and safe browsing block lists for extended periods. Security operations centers must prioritize the monitoring of newly registered domains, mimicking major telecom providers and fiscal authorities. Furthermore, User education must be updated to specifically address the threat of OTP relay attacks used for illicit digital wallet provisioning, emphasizing that legitimate rewards programs never require card data for point redemption. And that's the end of this Friday episode from France. I hope it provided clear and useful information. If you are a new listener, feel free to subscribe to the RadioCSIRT podcast. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, YouTube, Deezer, and Spotify. You can find all open source intelligence links used for this episode on RadioCSIRT.com. Until then, remember, don't think, just patch. I'll see you tomorrow for a new episode. Bye.